Perfect. So thank you for joining Sourcing 7 and Search Wizards for this webinar today. And most importantly, Amy Miller, thank you so much for presenting. If you didn't read or don't know already, Amy has roughly 20 years of experience in the recruiting industry and has hunted everything from truck drivers to CFOs. If you haven't already, you're going to want to go check out her blog, which I just love. And I love knowing I'm not the only one that is recruiting in yoga pants, and that is the URL, www.recruitinginyogapants. As you can tell from today, or from the title, Amy's going to be talking to us about building better partnerships between recruiting and sourcing. And thank you all for joining us again. And Amy, with that, I will give you the floor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here with you guys and talk through this. This is something, well, first of all, can I just say I'm glad I'm not the only one in yoga pants. This started as a joke and somehow has become a thing. Bought the URL. It's been lots of fun. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. Recruiting and sourcing, like what an odd couple, right? Like I don't know how many of the folks in the audience that are listening, you're probably firmly in one camp or the other. I know personally, I've always been on the recruiting side. Sourcing is definitely not my superpower, although I love those that work with me who have that superpower, and I couldn't do my job without you. So the goal of today is really to, first of all, kind of break down what are those two roles? What do we really do? How do we define them? Your mileage may vary, right? Every company is going to be structured a little differently. I've got a lot of full cycle friends. Sourcing looks different from company to company. Recruiting looks different. So with all of that said, keep in mind that there's going to be as many shades of gray as you can possibly fit into this, but I wanted to create some kind of initial guidelines and some initial thoughts around, okay, this is my job, this is your job, and then how do we bring those together, and how do we make this work in a way that doesn't feel adversarial, that isn't painful, and frankly in a way that not only makes the hire and gets us to the end goal, but that we can feel really good doing it. So with that, I said, let me go see what Google has to say about this. I'm a full-time Googler now, so I don't Bing as much as I once did. But this just made me laugh when I kind of looked at, okay, sourcers versus recruiters. What's out there? What's the word on the street, if you will? I laughed so hard at the sorcerers. They're like, do you mean magicians? Like, maybe I do. I've definitely worked with some sorcerers that I swear have a magic wand tucked on their desk. But in the bigger picture, there's like 2 million results that talk about this. And, you can see there's an article that popped up. There's what questions people ask. This is a big topic. And this is something that we could debate all day long. We could talk about this till the cows come home. There are clearly some significant differences between the two, but yet from the outside looking in, if I'm a candidate, I don't care. I don't care what you call yourself. I don't care what part of the recruiting cycle that you're on. If I'm a hiring manager, just bring me a candidate, bring me someone I can hire. So I'm less concerned about what is your title and what part of the process do you own? And I'm more concerned that you're just getting stuff done for me. So with that, let's talk about who does what. This is something, again, I know some of you are going to probably have, oh no, but I don't do any of that, or, oh, hey, I do way more than that. This is very generic, very general. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list, but just for the purposes of the relationship and my perspective, just how I think things tend to look like, right? So who does what? Well, the sourcers, for the most part, they're that front line. They're the ones that are doing the initial candidate generation. They're doing that outreach. Sometimes that looks like cold calling. Sometimes that is maybe mining your ATS really well. You've got a big fat database. There's lots of different ways that can look. But again, they're usually kind of that front line, and they're the people that are doing the initial outreach and maybe doing some screening. There are some folks that I've worked with that are just pure research. All they really do is focus on the data and bringing that information back to a recruiter or someone else within the organization, talent acquisition organization. And that's okay. But I think the key here is that a sourcer generally is someone who is bringing prospective candidates or bringing those leads into the process. So your mileage may vary. You might be doing some screening. You might be partnering with hiring managers, but really it's the person that is deep diving into the candidate data or prospective candidate data, the lead data, the potential people we might want to talk to data. So what does that leave for the recruiters to do? A lot. Recruiters, in my experience, generally are owning that position. So we have a hiring need. We know we need to fill a role. We need a butt in a seat. The recruiter, for the most part, is going to own that position and own kind of what that looks like. Okay, we're calibrating against a hiring need. We need a recruit or an engineer with X years of experience, with Y expertise, those kinds of things. And a lot of times they're owning the partnership then with the business or with the hiring team as well. And we'll dig into this a little bit more as far as how the two sides play in this pool. Recruiters may or may not do a screening. This is sometimes a contentious thing because if the sourcers are doing a really great job screening up front, who am I as a recruiter to come in and do it again? For my agency folks, I know a lot of us have experienced that pushback where we bring a solid candidate to an account manager who couldn't source, with a map, and and they're questioning us, they're pushing back, why is this person a fit? So that can be tricky. We're going to dig into that as well. But again, a lot of times the recruiters may have kind of a second layer screening or kind of a little extra questions or going deeper in certain areas that they want to probe on. Also, the recruiter, for the most part, is the closer. We talk a lot about closing. I think every conversation I have with my manager, we end it with, what's your closing strategy? So there's a lot of discussion about not just getting them through the interview, making sure candidates are prepared, making sure they have what they need, they're excited, they're engaged, they're prepped, but getting them to take the offer. I don't know about you guys. I'm sure our audience is all over the place in terms of what we're recruiting for. I can tell you in tech, my declines are terrible. I have a lot and they don't feel good. So that's a big job in and of itself. So really, what is the life cycle of a potential new hire and where does everyone fit here? So again, for the purposes of this chat and the stories that I'm going to share with you, this is how I'm thinking of it. The sourcers kind of live in that top line, right? So they're finding the people, they're digging up the profiles, they're making that first contact. And sometimes that's super general. It's, hey, I'm Amy from Google. I work with engineers all the time. I might have roles that make sense for you. What do you think? Would you like to talk to me? Can we get on a phone call? From there, we're probing interest and fit. Hey, do you fit a specific position we're hiring for? Are you interested in a specific product area or business group that I work with? Now we're getting formally in process. So now it's becoming real. This is about where the sourcer and recruiter come together. This is where we're like, okay, I'm handing this off to you. This is my baby that I have cultivated carefully in these first two steps. I need you, the recruiter, to take it to the finish line. So enter line 2. Now we're interviewing. Now we're keeping people excited. We're getting them prepped. We're getting them geared up for a successful interview process. Now we're making an offer. Now I've got to get them to accept. Most sourcers are graded on offer accepts. We can debate the fairness of that later, but given that circumstance, everybody has their eyes on the close. And then onboarding, again, depending on your company, depending on the infrastructure you have in place, you may or may not be super involved in that. So this is generally kind of who owns what, where people live in this process. And you can see right there in the middle, that formally in process going into interview can sometimes be a very, very tricky spot to be. And that's where the relationship is key. So what do people complain about? think about this. I do, we're all muted here, so forgive me for, we'll have to kind of table this for the end of the call, but I do want to think about what you're all personally experiencing, what complaints you're having. I made some very, very general statements here, but I will tell you, these are all things I have either said or heard from fellow recruiters, from sourcers, from my partners sometimes. I don't always get this right myself. But this is kind of the gist of the things that we worry about getting wrong, right? So I'm not getting the right profiles. I have a very clear need. I'm working on a very special machine learning engineering role, and my sourcers don't get it. They're not sending me what I need. Well, you know what? I don't have enough information to fill the role. I'm a sourcer. I'm trying to support your ML engineering need. I don't know what you want. So I don't have enough information to fill the role. Well, I don't have enough pipeline. I don't have enough resumes. My clients are complaining. Well, guess what? You're not responding to my candidates. Why am I going to send you more? Why am I throwing my people into a black hole? Well, I don't know what's going on with this candidate. I don't know what's going on with this requisition. I don't know what's happening. Well, hey, you didn't loop me into a meeting with the hiring manager. How am I supposed to know what's going on if I'm not involved in those discussions? So you can see, even with these very kind of broad general complaints that we all see and hear and probably have said, there's a tit for tat going on, right? There's a rebuttal, there's a backup, there's a pushback for any complaint that you could come up with. And so we want to dig into that, and we want to really think, instead of just defaulting to, ugh, I don't have enough pipeline, my sources aren't doing their job. Why is that? Dig into the reason behind that, and let's really unpack, how did we get here? Why do I feel this way? What does the data really tell me that either backs this up or refutes it? And then most importantly, how do we fix it and how do we move forward from here? So keep your complaints though. I would love to hear specific stories at the end when we get into our Q&A. I really want to understand the challenges you guys are seeing, the complaints you're hearing, and of course, how we can repair them. So communication, again, totally key, right? If you think about any relationship in your life, whether it's a spouse, siblings, best friends, parents, communication is key. Awkwardness is typically a result of a lack of communication. So anytime there's any bad feeling, or I don't like this person, or I don't think they like me, or this is just super uncomfortable, it's because we haven't maybe done a great job of sharing what we need to know, who needs to know it, and the information that we then have. So just some quick bullet points here. Think about when you're moving into this relationship, you're starting that new partnership with your other half, who should be included here? Is it just a one-to-one? Is it me and my sourcer, me and my recruiter? Is there a broader team that might be involved in this? So kind of figure out what really is the partnership, both the immediate kind of, one-to-one, and then also how does that evolve into like a one-to-many or a group relationship? And I'll share some case studies that will bring this a little bit more to light, but something to think about. Who do we need to include in the partnership? What does my partner need to know? If you have followed me for any span of time, if we're Facebook friends, if you've read my blogs, if you know anything about me, you know I rail against the customer service recruiters. With love, of course. And by customer service recruiters, I don't mean recruiters hiring for customer service. I mean, I need a cheeseburger, no lettuce. The recruiter scurries off to grab a cheeseburger with no lettuce and brings it back. I don't buy that. What does my partner need to know? How do we leverage the information? How do I make sure I'm giving you what you need to be successful in your role, whatever side of the house you're on? And how do we really make sure you have the information and know how to act on it? So how often do we need to do that? I hate meetings. I will tell you right now, meetings are the bane of my existence. There's too many of them, and often nothing is accomplished in them. But sometimes they can be very helpful and important. So think about, when you're building this partnership, how often do we need to meet? So not only who am I including, what am I sharing, But how often do we need to do this? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it somewhere in between? That's going to vary depending on the scope of your work and what you're trying to solve for, but it is something to start thinking about. So what makes sense from a cadence perspective? And then of course, building in some adaptability there. How do we divide and conquer? Again, a lot of times we're on very distinct sides of the recruiting house. So I'm solely focused on candidate generation, lead generation, bringing you sexy profiles you can do something with, or get me involved when the person's coming on site. Loop me in, introduce me when I know the person is coming to interview. We've got a guaranteed spot, hiring manager role, etc. So figure out who's going to own what. How do we divide this life cycle, this start to finish of recruiting, and how do we kind of make sure that each of us has the right expectations? And then finally, where are we housing all of this data? This is important because you know what? If it's not tracked, it didn't happen. How often have we heard that? You didn't put a note in the ATS, you never talked to that person, right? General statement, but I think we've all felt that pain. So there's some different ways that you can solve for that. And I'll share some things that I've personally done in my career. But one thing to think about, whether it's your ATS, a shared doc in, Word or Google Docs, or maybe a running agenda in your meeting invite. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but tracking that information and getting really clear on the details that we need to have and be able to share is really important to this relationship building. So going into a couple of case studies, and here's really the meat of today, and I wanted to share two distinct ways that I've done this in my career and kind of the pros and cons of both. So a lot of talking here. Please take some notes, ask some questions as we get to Q&A if there's anything I can go deeper on. But two very distinct ways at two different companies that I've done this, and both have been successful in their own ways. So the first is profile-based hiring. We had a scenario where a recruiter was aligned to a specific business, and we had a sourcing team that was really divided into two different distinct pipelines. So one was what we would call core, where I'm just going after that repeatable, like I'm going to just bring in engineer after engineer after engineer. We know that there's 100 different places in the company this person could sit. This is a volume play. This is maybe a little more transactional play. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just what worked for that type of hiring. The other side of our sourcing strategy is what we call pivotal. So thinking about really specialized efforts. I need 1 of 10 people in the world that can do this job, and I literally have one place in a 200,000 person company where they could do it. That is a special search. That is not something that your core sourcer is going to find, have time for, or be invested in. And it's also not something you're going to do again until 5 years later the person's promoted or moves on or whatever. So those are very distinct types of sourcing efforts, and it requires not only a very different kind of person, but a different kind of relationship. So as a recruiter who owned a business, and that's where I sat, I had a particular team that, hey, I'm going to own your hiring. I am your person. If you have a hiring need, if you have a complaint, oh God, there were many, anything at all that's top of mind for you that is focused on building your team, I'm your girl. So we would have those conversations. I would own that piece up front, and then I would have to make a determination, where does this fit on the sourcing strategy side? Is this a repeatable hiring effort? Is this something we can do perhaps with a hiring event, or perhaps by running an interview day? And there's a lot of different ways, and I won't go into all the nuts and bolts of that, but there's a lot of different ways that you can solve for that. But then on the other hand, wow, this is really special. This is like a key focus area for the business. This is a really specialized, like, I call out machine learning because I lived in that world for a long time, and it's crazy. But this is a really key kind of profile. I don't live in this world all day, every day. I need some help. Enter my partners, right? So the way we had things lined up, you would have your core sourcers who, again, they're machines. They're just plugging away. They're bringing in amazing profiles. They're bringing in people that can go many different directions. Feels a little transactional, but it works. Then you have your pivotal area. You have those specialized ones we talked about. So my role was to bring those people in. Now, how do I get them to work with me? How do I get them to like me? Let's face it, sourcers are going to go where the business is. They're going to go where people get shit done, and they're going to go where they can get their candidates hired. So that's a key element here. Being the kind of partner that's keeping them involved, keeping them in the loop, keeping them focused on work that's actually going to turn into a hire. We talked earlier about how people are graded. What is the how do you know you're doing a good job, right? When you get your review, when you think about, okay, was I successful? Did I make the right number of hires? Sourcers a lot of times are graded on hires. I don't necessarily think that's fair because there's so much that sourcers don't control on the back end, but a lot of companies are built that way. So how do we make this work? Driving that partnership is making it work. And so from the recruiter's perspective, you really need to have a very, very clear set of expectations. I'm contracting with my sourcing partners for you, Mr. Hiring Manager. I am giving them certain expectations. We are committed to talking to their candidates. We are committed to showing up to a hiring event, whatever that may be. So think about your sourcing menu, if you will, and what can I really effectively what will work for me, and then also making sure that my business is on board and that my business is willing to play ball and actually do what they need to do to make these relationships happen. So in a case like this profile-based hiring, we have kind of two clients, if you think about it from a recruiting perspective. I have two clients here. I have my sourcing partners who I want to keep happy. I want to keep the pipeline flowing. I want to make sure that they feel that their efforts are being rewarded, that their candidates are being taken care of and hired. And then I have my clients who, frankly, are consuming that talent. They're the end of that pipeline, and we want to make sure that they're getting what they need and the pipeline is right. So you're juggling a couple different relationships here. The downside from a sourcing perspective, so if I'm a sourcer and I'm living in one of these worlds, and I'll start with core, I've got just a bunch of folks I need to find homes for. There are a lot of similar profiles. There are a lot of people that are kind of doing the same thing, could plug and play in a lot of different places. There's two big drivers there. One is, what does my candidate want to do? And two, who wants my candidate to do this? So understanding, hey, somebody may have a real strong bias to a cloud organization, for example. Hey, I'm an engineer and I've been doing distributed systems for a long time, and I really, really want to work with a cloud provider, AWS, Azure, GCP, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what the company is. The sourcer then has to really own that and push that back with both the business as well as the recruiter that, hey, maybe my candidate's not into you. It doesn't matter if you like this person or want this person. They don't want to do this thing. So sometimes there's a difficult balancing act there that needs to happen. So again, it's the communication piece. It's figuring out, how can we partner together for the best of the business as well as the candidate. So sourcers really need to be able to own that and be able to speak to motivations and give the sourcers in the business, if it's appropriate, an opportunity to sell against those blockers, or, well, here's why this non-cloud team is super cool. Please consider us. On the pivotal side, this is much more specialized. This is like, I have the smallest subset of really smart, special people in a very specific area, and we have to, a lot of times, to give them white glove treatment. We have to think very carefully about how are we leveraging their expertise? Who are we introducing them to? This often is not more of a volume play. This is a very kind of one-to-one situation. And where this sometimes falls apart, similar to the core side, you may not have the right opportunity. As a recruiter or as a business, you may not have what the sourcer needs to effectively sell this candidate. So again, keeping that communication open. Sourcers need to be okay pushing back, okay asking questions, making sure that their candidates' interests are kept top of mind. And then recruiters as well need to be asking those questions. This is not a consumer model where I walk into Kroger and grab the lactose-free milk off the shelf. That's not how this works. your candidate has a say in this. So making sure that the sourcer and the recruiter are lockstep and aligned on making that partnership work is key. The second thing here is making sure that this rotating group of sourcing partners, because it's not always going to be the same, right? It's based on your hiring need. Do I need high volume? Cool. I'm tapping my core people, and those could be different depending on what I'm looking for. Am I tapping specialized areas? Well, your machine learning recruiter or sourcer may be very different from your data science sourcer, may be very different from your computer vision sourcer. So think about things like that. You're not always going to have the same partner. That may change. So how do you maintain these short burst relationships throughout this process? It's exactly the things we've talked about. Focusing on the communication, pulling them into hiring manager meetings, pulling them into different things that may be important or top of mind, and making sure that everyone has the right expectations set. One of the first things that I would do when partnering with a new business in this kind of case study is I would say, I'm your person. I'm going to be recruiting for you till they fire me or something better comes along. And you and I are in this together, Mr. Hiring Team. But here's the deal. We're going to have different people in and out of this partnership. It doesn't mean they're any less valuable. It doesn't mean that you don't owe that person the same follow-up information partnership as what you're giving me. It just means that that person may change more frequently. We're going to spend 3 months working on this ludicrous computer vision PhD super special niche role. We're going to work with Joe. Once we have filled this and we're never going to hire computer vision again for another year or two, we may not hear from Joe again. That's okay, but setting those expectations is critical. So that's one key case study. I actually loved this effort. I thought this worked really well. At first, I will tell you, my concerns were, gosh, this is kind of transactional. I don't know if I love that. Some of the downsides were my partners were changing all the time. Depending on what I was looking for, I would have a different person from week to week, or more commonly, I was juggling 5 or 6 sourcing partners. I had to really think about, oh, okay, do I need to talk to Joe every week? Okay, maybe I can just talk to Bill once a month. So really figuring out how to juggle multiple relationships. So kind of thinking about that one-to-many mentality and really kind of focusing on the key partnerships and the key, setting the key expectations with all of those partners. From a sourcing perspective, gosh, I might have 5 or 6 different, super specialized niche kind of things I'm working on. I've got to juggle 5 or 6 recruiters who all have very high maintenance managers and very, very business critical roles. So really learning to ask those questions and tying the critical nature of a role or of a hiring ask back to the business goals and the business function. So a lot more can be said on that. Hopefully we'll have some time in Q&A if that's helpful for you guys and you want to dig in. But I can tell you, pros and cons aside, this I felt like was one of the stronger models I've personally worked in. And it made a lot of sense because we put a lot of focus on what's right for the candidate. That to me, across all of recruiting, no matter where you are, what you're doing what's right for the candidate should be at the forefront. So case study 2, this is a much more simple scenario. This is a business aligned hiring model. We see this a lot in agency sometimes. Certainly a lot of corporations function this way, but this is a much cleaner, but also sometimes more challenging model. What I mean by that, so first of all, let's define it. This is where you tend to have the recruiter and the sourcer who are kind of 2 halves of the same whole, focusing on a particular group. So you have a clear business alignment. One of my colleagues put it this way a few days ago, which I loved. Put us together. We're like a transformer, right? Like you put different pieces together and it kind of turns us into the super recruiter, hopefully, or super talent acquisition person. The nice thing about this is you are lockstep with someone. You have a clear partner. You're my person. We're in this together. We're rising and sinking on the same tide, right? Like we are in this together. Typically, you have very clear shared client engagement. You go to those meetings together, you own the partnership together, you have the same kind of set of OKRs or expectations or responsibilities to get the hire. And you generally are going to focus on very specific needs. Like, okay, I in my current world, for example, because this is the model that I currently work in, I focus on YouTube, engineering managers for YouTube. And I have a sourcing partner who is a dream. Not going to tell you her name, so I don't want any of you to steal her from me. She's amazing. But we are lockstep. Like, we go to all the meetings together. We talk probably every day, and we both have a very clear responsibility as it relates to hiring managers for YouTube. So what does that look like? Basically, she owns everything up front. It's the candidate generation. It's making sure the broader sourcer team has their marching orders. They know what's important. They know our profiles. They know the priority roles, things like that. And then on my side, I have the responsibility to get people through close. So the sourcing team, whether it's my aligned sourcer or her broader teammate that also will send pipeline to us, they get someone interested, they get somebody on board for an interview, and now I pick it up. So again, even though I have one key person that is my person, and she and I are lockstep besties in this recruiting world, there are still a lot of other relationships that I'm juggling and partnerships that I'm working with. So it's great with the person that you work with every day. They get to know you really well. And this could be either side, right? A sourcer or recruiter. You know me. We're friends. You know when I'm having a bad day. You know that I'm usually pretty good at this. I kind of know what I'm doing. I bring you great candidates. I close people well, whatever it may be. But then you have the juggling of all these other partnerships that are happening. So it's critical to make sure that the partnership is strong enough that my counterpart, my sourcing partner, is able to say, oh no, Amy's actually good at this. Amy, yeah, you can trust her with your candidate. It's okay. So you kind of develop an advocate, if you will, on the other side, and then vice versa. I sing my sourcer's praises all the time because I know she's sending candidates to other business groups and areas as well. So it does drive a really cool partnership and a really cool kind of ability to get to know someone really well and to work very closely. But the downside is there's limits to how deep that can go. You know, I mean, I can't only rely on her particular pipeline because we just have too many, we're hiring too much. We have too many open roles. One person can't possibly do it, and vice versa. So the sourcers can't rely on just me to get hires for them and to get their candidates in process. So that's where the business align can get a little tricky. You do have to build in flexibility typically to send folks other directions or do other things, but always having kind of that core relationship at the center. The other downside to this is sometimes businesses can be confused. They're like, okay, so you're my talent acquisition partner, but you don't find me candidates. I can't ask you about pipeline health. I can't, you know, things like that. So it's important for us to have that clear separation of responsibility and for each of us to do what we're really good at and focus on our specific role. But that communication piece, again, is so important because clients don't care. Candidates usually don't care. They just want to get to the finish line. So being able to keep that flow of information and regular meetings, regular syncs to kind of know what each person is doing is so important. So ways I've seen this work, again, it goes back to you've got that advocate. You've got the person that's lockstep with you. We both know what we're hiring for. We both have a really, really solid understanding of our particular business group. And, but at the same time, we're able to share that information more broadly as needed. To the business as well, we will, starting from the very first intake, the very first strategy meeting, we will say, here is our clear alignment. This is what this person is going to do. This is what that person is going to do. We are going to communicate with you about different things, but please consider us a single talent acquisition unit in support of your business growth. So that's a way to do it. This, I think, the partnership is possibly more important, not to diminish the previous case study, because again, I love that model and it works really well. But here, you're lockstep with another person. And it is so, so, so important that frankly, that you like each other. I mean, I'm just going to call it what it is. Like that, it matters that you get along with this person. You know, I'm not saying we're going to be besties with all of our coworkers all the time, but this is such an important partnership that if there's any weirdness or any hurt feelings or any lack of trust, it can be really, really tough. So those are the case studies. Going into, now that we've identified a couple of ways that we can do that, of course, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. Your model may look entirely different, but how do we make it work? So again, I think it's all the things we've covered. It's really setting those very, very clear expectations. What can you realistically expect from me? What are our goals? And so I want to dig into this a little bit. I mentioned earlier about a lot of times we'll have the same goal, right? I need to make X number of hires this month, for example. Your sourcer or your recruiter, depending on what side you're on, probably has a similar goal. A lot of times, and I've talked with lots of staffing leaders about this. I've in my company, outside of my company, anyone who will listen to me, I drive this conversation. What is the purpose of this function? It is to make hires. And that is the number one thing that I hear more than anything else. We are here to make hires. We are here to put butts in seats. We are here to fill open positions. Requisition fulfillment, is where it's at. So, okay, I, as a recruiter, have to make 2 hires in a month. I'm just making up numbers here, but let's say 2 hires in a month. So does my sourcer. So if we both at the end of the day are looking at this going, okay, I've got to make 2 hires this month, how am I going to do that? Knowing that I have these other expectations, I'm working in this particular business model, how do I get to those 2 hires a month? Forget about all the other noise, forget about all the other stuff. I've got to get these 2 hires a month. That's at the end of the day, the one thing I care about more than anything else. And if I'm counting on you to help me get those 2 hires a month, we have to be on the same page. We've got to get along. We've got to be in sync. So going back to making it work, how do we define our role responsibilities? So being very, very clear on, I'm a sourcer. I'm responsible for candidate generation. I will do an initial pre-screen. I will attempt to get candidates interested in whatever the role is that you're hiring for or the positions you're trying to fill. And then I'm handing them off to you. So this is what you can expect from me. And even if it makes sense to, drill that down into specific numbers. You know, we all love the pipeline and the funnel pictures, and there's all kinds of cool graphics out there about this, but it may be, I'm going to commit to sending you 10 candidates this month. You will see 10 fully vetted candidates from me that are interested in the role, that are qualified, that are available, that are affordable, whatever it may be. So really not just identifying, okay, here's the expectation, here's the role, here's what I do, but then here's what's reasonable. You can expect this from me, and if I don't meet this, then we have something to talk about. Too often we're not doing that, right? We're just saying, oh yeah, I'm going to go source for you and I'm going to fill your funnel. What does that look like? I would propose to you, if you're not already, think about tying some numbers to those expectations. Can I get 10 people in this month? Do I need 10 people in this month, right? So now we go to the recruiting side of that, and the expectation is, okay, we both need to make a couple hires this month. That's cool. But guess what? Here's what that data looks like. And in order to get 2 people, we have to make 4 offers because half of them are going to be declined. We just know that. So in order to get 4 offers, well, gosh, that's 10 interviews. We have an even worse pass-through rate with interviews. So in order to get 10 interviews, hey, you know what? Yeah, I do need those 10 people in a month. Okay, cool. I made up all those numbers, but they just worked. So that was a nice surprise. But think about in terms of what the actual goals are. In order to satisfy this need, I'm going to need X amount of effort from you. I'm putting X amount of effort in from me, depending on the side you're on. So establish those goals and really think about what does success look like. Success, for the most part, looks like hires. I would caveat that with sometimes, and I heard this from one of my old bosses at Microsoft who's no longer there. She's moved into a entirely different field now, but she was amazing. And she told me that sometimes good consulting looks like bad customer service. And I remind myself of that often because frankly, in the course of setting these expectations, I'm usually pissing someone off. So, but establish those goals, think about what success really looks like. Ultimately, it's hires, possibly it's business impact, probably it's some kind of education justification for the work that we're doing, and make sure that you and your partners, whether you have the single point of contact or the broader team, are in sync on that. So now we're going to go forth and partner. We're going to go make this work. Hopefully I've given you guys some things that you can use at your desk today. Looks like we're going to have some time for Q&A. So I'm excited to hear what you guys think, dig into some specific questions or things that you want to talk about. So goal number one, make sure you're on the same page. Think about what is the business goal ultimately. Yes, I know it's making hires. Got it. I know I'm here for rec fulfillment, message received. But what are we hiring and why? Do we need to go and hire, 20 software engineers? Do we need to do a volume play? Do we need to just bring in a bunch of people that can just perform a function? Do we need those really specialized people? Did we lose someone key? Do we have a gap in leadership? So sourcers as well as recruiters should be asking these questions. It not only is informing your hiring need and what I'm going to go out and look for, but it's also really giving you some great sell material. If I can go back to a candidate, or if you're a sourcer and you're able to go back to a business or to a candidate and say, hey, I have this really cool opportunity. It's working with this particular team and you're going to be working in this technology, but let me tell you why it's cool. We just lost a really senior person. And this person is going to do these cool things and visibility and growth, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you kind of pull out those themes, but by really getting clear on business goals and specifically what happens if we don't hire, this is your opportunity to craft a pitch. And I think a lot of times if I could wave a magic wand, I would want my sourcing partners to be more in tune with the company goals, with what happens if we don't hire, with what the gaps are on an existing team, with the emotional fallout. I deal with this a lot with engineering managers. If I'm going to go hire a new leader, are there people on the team being passed over for promotion that are going to be mad? Did the team lose a manager that they loved? Are they crying for strong leadership? Like, these are all questions that I want us to ask, and I want my sourcers to be asking as well. I want us to be lockstep on really digging into the pitch and why this company, why this team, why this role, what's in it for the candidate. The second big thing I would call out is data is everything. I've worked with engineers for a long time. I learned this the hard way. If it is not documented, it did not happen, and nobody cares how you feel. I would go to a client and say, well, I feel like you've seen a lot of resumes this month, and they would just blank stare like, what are you saying, crazy lady? If I don't see it in writing in a pie chart, it didn't happen. So translate that to your day-to-day, right? So again, whether it's a shared spreadsheet, an ATS, or whatever, figure out what works and make sure you're documenting every touch point, every phone call, every status update, every change in hiring needs, anything at all. Make sure you're writing it down in a place where your partners can access it and you guys can action it. So think about, how do I take that data and turn it into my workflow? We talked just quickly, I mentioned pass-through rates. So really digging into, okay, it takes X number of interviews to make a hire, or it takes X number of submittals to get an interview. Things like that are critical. One thing I'm constantly preaching to my team is, I don't want to just throw more resumes at this. I don't want to just say, oh, we've just doubled our rec load, we need to double our submittal rates? Not necessarily. That's not always the right answer. So think about the data, think about your decline rates, your pass-through rates, all the stuff it takes to get to that ultimate goal of the hire. And then how do I turn that into a strategy? Whether it's pulling in specialized support, maybe it is amping up the number of resumes, or maybe it's doing something more creative on the sourcing side. So things to think about. So wonderful. Time for Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone. Hopefully you've been able to pull a few pearls out of that.
Or go to the front door and punch in 604 and it will call me and I can give him remote access. Maybe the phone's because the phone's not working, I can't give him remote access. I have to come down, let him in.
All right, we're all unmuted, so please be aware of that.
Yep.
Questions from the chat. So I was going to go ahead and ask a couple questions from the chat. So communication is certainly important. Do you have a standardized process that recruiters follow? And if so, how are you able to get everybody on board with the same process?
Making sure that everything has been.
Okay, sorry. I think there's a side conversation happening. I want to make sure I caught that. So, so communication is key. And then the question was, is there a standardized process and how do I get everybody on the same page?
Yes.
Yeah, everything's good. So,
let me just.
Thank you so much for your patience and time and for being a great.
I think someone's on a phone call and I'm easily distracted at best. So yeah, thinking about standards, right? I think one way to approach this is ask people what they want. I certainly, and coming into a new role, I can share, you know, maybe not my finest moment with you guys. I joined Google not so long ago, and I came in with some pretty clear ideas. You know, I'm like, oh, we need to work this way, and it needs to look like that. And people don't love that all the time. So I think you first and foremost want to start very broadly. Like, hey, we're going to work together. This is what our partnership looks like. These are the expectations you and I have. What works for you? So I think there's going to be certain things you're going to put your foot down and say, I absolutely need to have X, but I'm flexible on Y, Z, and A. Okay, so think about the one or two critical things that you absolutely must have that are absolutely not negotiable, and make sure you're building in flexibility for the rest, right? So for me, one of the things that is absolutely critical for me is we need to be, we need to publicly praise, privately complain. Okay, and so what I mean by that is when I'm in front of a hiring manager, one of the non-negotiables for me is like, you and I are lockstep. We are partners. We are not going to complain. I would never go into a client meeting and say, well, you know, our pipeline really isn't that strong right now. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, while my sourcing partner's sitting there, right? Like that's a non-negotiable for me. I'm not sure if I'm totally answering the question, but this is important, you know, what was top of mind for me. And I think getting really clear on cadence. I have had sourcing partners in the past that did not think they needed to meet with me. That to me, again, is one of my non-negotiables. And again, hey, maybe it's monthly, maybe it's as needed. Like I understand my cadence may not work for you, but one of the I need FaceTime with you. I need to get on the phone with you for at least 10 minutes once a month or something. So I think really just figuring out what's kind of the most critical thing for you to as far as relationship building goes, and then just putting a stake in the ground and saying, I in order to be a good partner to you, I need this. Like I need this thing to work. So I don't know if that was an exact answer, but that's what's top of mind for me.
Awesome, thank you. So the next question that I have was, you mentioned that you don't necessarily agree that sourcers should be measured by the hires. What do you
so unpopular.
What do you think they should be measured by?
I get a lot of pushback, especially from leadership. They kind of side-eye me a little bit when I say this. Here's what I think. I think that sourcers control a certain amount of this, right? Sourcers control getting someone to the game. They don't necessarily control if they win the game. And let me clarify. if you're looking back at data, and let's say I'm grading my sourcers on, okay, here's what I think. Ultimately, if it were up to me, sourcers would be graded on offer extended. If I have a candidate who has gotten to that point and where they're good enough to get an offer, they've made it through the screening, they've had a successful interview, we like them enough that we want to invest in giving them money, that is a win. If that person is declining, there's a whole lot of factors that could be going on there. It could be the recruiter's just not a good closer. It could be compensation isn't right. It could be any number of things that stop that deal from happening. But I think the work that the sourcers are putting in up front is really illustrated. The value of that work is illustrated in getting someone to an offer, not necessarily whether or not that person is taking our offer. I know that's super unpopular. It'll probably never happen in my lifetime, but that's my view on it. Anyone want to change my mind?
I actually agree with that. I don't think it's unpopular at all.
Thank you. I don't know that it will ever happen, but that's how I feel about it.
So another question that came up from the chat. So how do you set expectations in terms of number of candidates in a pipeline for different requirements?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. I think you do any historical data that you have, anything that says, hey, we hired this person last year and this is what it took to get there. That's a good starting point. But I think also there's a lot to be said for leaning on your sourcers to, hey, how many of these people exist? You know, are there a lot of PhDs with computer vision backgrounds? I'm not sure. So taking that labor market data and really figuring out what's the pool I'm starting with is important, but it's also just as important to think about what's the appropriate, you know, pass-through rate. Like if I know I'm only going to hire half of the people that I interview, right there, I'm doubling a number just at interview stage. So looking at how many people does it take to get to an interview, those kinds of things. So those pass-through rates, kind of funnel stuff is important. But I think there's two big things the sourcing community should be mindful of. One is, what does the pool really look like? Are there an X number of available prospects to begin with? And then two, factoring in how much effort goes into bringing that prospect to the table, how many times can I do that in a given time period? So if it's a very high level, senior, white glove kind of candidate experience that the sourcer is doing, you're not going to have 10, 20, 30 people a month. You might have 5 or 10, right? Probably more than that. But, you know, so think about what can the sourcer effectively churn out. And so that's where I think, even as a sourcer, having that pass through information, like I've got to make 100 phone calls to get 20 people on the phone, and out of that 20 people, I'm only going to get, you know, 10 of them, and those kinds of things. So sourcers should be willing to, like, very upfront say, here's the actual output you can expect from me, and know when do we need to call in additional support, different kinds of sourcing strategies, things like that.
Thank you. And so the last question that I have from the chat right now is, do you have any suggestions on way that you can share and track candidate data with stakeholders other than Excel?
Yeah, other than Excel. Oh my heavens. You know, all ATSs are not created equal. So, you know, Excel certainly, or Google Sheets is probably the reigning, you know, king. I like, and I've done this before, not necessarily in my current role, but I've done this before where I've actually just taken the data and plugged it into a pivot table and turned it into a graph where you could actually visit. It works great with engineers. You could actually see, like, oh crap, we saw that many resumes and we only hired 2 people. And so you have a really nice visual. So I think the bigger question though is, what information are you wanting to share? Are you wanting to just show historical trends? Are you wanting to actually look at specific candidates? So I think that's probably a deeper question than we have time for, but I'm happy to, you know, reconnect with anyone that wants to go deeper on this.
Thank you. That's all the questions from the chat right now.
Okay, perfect. Any from the audience? We've got a decent number of folks still with us. Anything top of mind for you guys? All right, cool.
Hey, Amy. Yeah. So I have a question. This is Kim.
Hi, Kim.
So, hi. So you talk about relationships with sourcers and recruiters, and I know I was blessed when I was at Microsoft. I was very fortunate, and you touched on a lot of things, but I think the one thing, and now that I'm in full recruiter role, it's about the trust, and you mentioned that, but it's also, and I think you also, I'm sure you've mentioned this too, but it's also of being able to let go.
Yes.
And let them know that you believe in them, because once they have that feeling and that strength to move forward,
yeah,
it would be it's unbelievable what somebody can do. It's like, wow, they really believe in me. I've got this.
It's so empowering, right? And I know you and I have worked together twice, and I love you. And you're one of the best people in this industry from my perspective. So yeah, and I think you and I have that shared history where I would trust you with anything. Like, I've seen you work, I know your work, I've seen the output as a sourcer when I was a recruiter, even though we were on sister teams at Microsoft. Like, yes, trust is critical, and people just want to feel empowered. And that goes both ways. Like, I know if I give this marching order, for lack of a better term, to my partner, I know she's going to kill it. I don't have to check on her work. I don't have to say, well, show me your pipeline. How many people have you talked to today? I don't need to get in the weeds with her, because I know she gets it. And I know that she will bring to the table what needs to be brought.
But a lot of recruiters don't get that. And that's, yeah.
Yeah, and they should. And I think, that's probably a whole other webinar.
Yeah. It's almost like you want them to switch roles and understand what it is to be a sourcer and to really get it.
100%.
But one quick question too also is, you had commented on candidates and, pipelines and Excel and all that. But what about the sourcers? And I don't know if you currently still have anybody like this. Doesn't sound like it, but where they're just throwing things at a wall.
Yeah. No, it does happen, even in the best of teams and circumstances. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, again, going back to data is key. So being able, and I've actually done this where I've gone back and said, okay, we've submitted all of these resumes, but only like 7 out of 30 or 40 or whatever were selected to move forward. So let's get into the why. And so being able, the thing is, this becomes so personal, right?
Yep.
If you don't like my candidate, it's a personal attack on me sometimes. Yep. And so making sure from a recruiting seat or a leadership seat or whatever, making sure that you're focusing on the data and saying, okay, I love the effort you put in here. I'm so grateful that you threw me 47 candidates, but here's why 40 of them didn't meet the mark. So how can we do this differently? Right? Like, thank you for the
I think we just decided a whole nother webinar.
I think we did. So yeah, definitely something to talk about. I want to just quickly in our last minute, hopefully you can see the final screen here. One of the things that I'm super passionate about is just helping other people. It's why I do these webinars and why hopefully you guys got something of value out of this. But for anyone who has questions you didn't get to ask or just wants to talk more about this, no strings attached, 30-minute coaching session with me. Any subject you want to talk about as it relates to recruiting, just send me an email with the Sourcing 7 webinar subject line. I will book 30 minutes with you and at least commiserate with you, if nothing else. Hopefully I can give you advice or something helpful, but always love to just talk about recruiting stuff. So that's my parting gift to those that are still with us.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah,
I don't know how you have time for that, but sure you will get many requests.
I hope so. Thank you. We'll make time. We'll figure it out. It might take us a few weeks, but we'll get there.
So the recording will be delivered, and thank you for everyone for joining us, and especially you, Amy, for presenting today.
Thank you.
That was excellent.
The webinar is now over. Feel free to drop off of the line. Thank you.